The verdict was silence. Not the absolution of cheers, not the condemnation of chains snapping shut, just the hollow quiet that follows a judgment too dangerous to be spoken aloud. Captain Demetrian Titus stood alone beneath the cold lumen glow of an inquisitorial chamber, his armor stripped of heraldry, his past victories reduced to a single question echoing in the air. How had he resisted the warp when others far purer had fallen? No answer satisfied them. The last the ultramarines saw of their captain, he was walking between robed figures whose faces were hidden, whose authority eclipsed even that of chapter masters. No honors, no farewell. Only the faint scrape of ceramite boots on stone, fading into a future deliberately erased from record. For most, that would have been the end of the story. But in the Imperium of man, silence is never empty. It is a grave. Titus was not imprisoned in a cell with bars and chains. His prison was movement, transit, endless translation through the void aboard black ships whose names were classified and whose destinations were never logged. Time blurred. Days became watch cycles. Watch cycles dissolved into the dull rhythm of prayer, maintenance, and scrutiny. He was examined not as a warrior, but as a paradox. A space marine who had stood in the raw presence of chaos and emerged untainted. That made him dangerous. The Inquisition does not destroy mysteries immediately. It studies them, dissects them, keeps them alive just long enough to decide whether they can be weaponized. When the interrogations came, they were not violent. Violence was unnecessary. Instead, there were questions asked in voices devoid of emotion, questions layered with sigils that hummed faintly as they were spoken. Librarians probed the edges of his thoughts, never breaking through, never finding corruption, only discipline, iron resolve, and something else. Not faith, not arrogance, conviction without explanation. That unsettled them more than any demon ever could. For Titus, the greatest torment was not suspicion, it was distance. Distance from his brothers, from the codex he had upheld, from the battlefield where clarity existed in bolter fire and blood. Here, there was only doubt, and doubt was a slow poison. Years passed, or perhaps only months. Time aboard inquisitorial vessels obeys different rules. When at last the decision came, it was delivered without ceremony. He would not be executed, nor would he be returned. Instead, he was reassigned. The armor they brought him was black. No sigil of Ultramar, no mark of company or honor roll. Only a silver Inquisition eye and the faintest trace of a skull, worn smooth by centuries of forgotten wars. Titus understood the meaning instantly. The Deathwatch. To fight where records do not exist. To kill enemies whose names are erased after extermination. To serve alongside warriors torn from their chapters, each carrying secrets as heavy as their bolters. This was not redemption, it was exile with purpose. They never asked for his consent. The transition was brutal by design. His blue armor was reforged, its ceramite plates recast and repainted, every familiar mark stripped away. His name was spoken less frequently. Rank became irrelevant. In the Deathwatch, reputation is forged anew with every mission, and many never live long enough to earn one. His first deployment came without warning. A Xenos-infested moon orbiting a dead gas giant, its surface scarred by structures that defied human geometry. Tyranid splinter fleet remnants, the briefing said. Containment failure. No survivors expected. Titus descended in a kill team of strangers. A space wolf who spoke only in growls. A raven guard who moved like a shadow between heartbeats. A salamander whose silence was heavier than most men's words. They did not ask about his past. In the Deathwatch, questions are liabilities. The fighting was relentless. Tyranids came in waves that blotted out the horizon, screeching masses of claw and hunger. Titus fought as he always had, decisive, unyielding, pushing forward when doctrine suggested retreat. And once again, he noticed it. The warp recoiled from him. Not dramatically, not enough for anyone else to see, but in the moments when psychic static crackled across the battlefield, when lesser men would falter, Titus advanced untouched. Synapse creatures shrieked as if sensing something wrong. Not fear, recognition. The Raven Guard noticed. Said nothing. Mission after mission followed. Orc war hulks drifting through forbidden sectors. Eldar ruins pulsing with residual witchlight. Heretic Astartes strongholds where the air itself whispered blasphemy. Titus survived them all. Not because he was reckless, but because something about him bent the rules just enough to keep him standing when probability demanded his death. Reports were filed, carefully worded, passed upward through channels that ended in locked vaults. The Inquisition watched from afar, never intervening, never commenting. They were waiting to see if he would break. He did not. But survival in the Deathwatch comes at a cost. Brothers fell around him, one by one, their names recorded in ledgers no civilian would ever read. Titus learned to fight without attachment, to respect without mourning. He became a weapon refined by isolation, sharpened by scrutiny. And slowly, subtly, the mystery surrounding him deepened. Astropaths reported disturbances when he was nearby. Demons showed hesitation, only a fraction of a second, but enough. Enough for a bolter round, enough for a blade strike, enough to change the outcome of a battle. The Inquisition does not tolerate unexplained advantages. Whispers followed him now, carried through sealed Vox channels and encrypted data slates. Some claimed he was a null, though he bore none of the usual signs. Others suggested ancient gene seed anomalies dating back to Guilliman himself. A few more dangerous voices wondered if the Emperor had marked him in some way, an idea quickly buried before it could grow roots. Titus never heard these debates. He only felt the weight of being observed, measured not as a hero, but as a variable. Then came the summons. No mission briefing, no kill team assignment. A single message encoded with inquisitorial authority, ordering him to report alone. The ship that received him was old beyond reckoning, its corridors lined with purity seals layered over older purity seals, as if trying to suffocate something beneath. He was escorted to a chamber far smaller than the one where he had been judged years before. Only one figure waited inside. An inquisitor whose rosette bore marks of radical campaigns and purges best left unnamed. "You have served," the inquisitor said, "not praise. A statement of fact. And you have endured." Titus said nothing. "There are those who believe you should remain exactly where you are," the inquisitor continued. "And others who fear what your continued existence implies." A pause. Deliberate. "The ultramarines have requested your return." The words struck harder than any blow, not relief, not joy. A tightening in the chest that Titus had not felt since before his trial. The chapter had not forgotten him. Or perhaps they had only just been allowed to remember. "But understand this," the inquisitor said, leaning closer. "Your fate is not resolved. It is postponed. You will return changed, watched, and should you ever prove inconvenient, the threat was unfinished. It did not need to be." When Titus left the chamber, his armor was still black. No orders had yet been given to repaint it. No proclamation awaited him. Only a ship plotting a course toward ultramar space, and a future that felt heavier than exile ever had. As the vessel entered the warp, the Geller field flared, and for the briefest moment, something howled in protest beyond reality's veil. Titus did not react. He simply stood, fists clenched, as if listening to a challenge only he could hear. The howl faded as the warp settled, leaving only the low vibration of the ship's engines and the steady thrum of the Geller field. Titus remained motionless long after the turbulence ended. He had heard that sound before, not with his ears, but somewhere deeper. The warp had recognized him, and it had not liked what it found. Ultramar space emerged from the void like a memory made solid. Blue-white stars burned cleanly, unmarred by the sickly distortions common to more corrupted regions of the Imperium. For most warriors, it would have felt like home. For Titus, it felt like judgment delayed. The ship did not broadcast its arrival. No honor escort formed, No banners were unfurled. Instead, it slipped into orbit with clinical precision, a silent courier delivering a weapon whose nature remained classified even to itself. When the order came for Titus to disembark, it was accompanied by a final directive: remove all inquisitorial markings. The black armor came away piece by piece. Beneath it waited ceramite the color of deep ocean steel, newly forged but etched with patterns that mirrored those of the 13th Legion. Ultramarine blue, familiar, heavy with meaning. When he sealed the final plate into place, Titus felt the weight of years settle onto his shoulders, not the burden of command, but the gravity of return. They did not greet him at the landing platform. Not at first. Servitors went about their routines as if he were any other cargo. It was only as he stepped onto the marble deck that movement stirred. A figure emerged from the shadows at the far end of the hall, tall even by Astartes standards, clad in artificer armor chased with gold. Captain Cato Sicarius did not smile. He approached slowly, every step deliberate, blue eyes locked on Titus as if searching for a flaw in reality itself. The silence between them stretched, thick with memory and unspoken accusation. Titus could feel the eyes of others, now battle brothers, watching from balconies and corridors, pretending not to stare. "You should be dead," Sicarius said at last. "So I've been told," Titus replied. A flicker crossed Sicarius's face, not anger, something closer to uncertainty. "The chapter was informed you were lost, that your fate was beyond our reach. And now?" "Now," Sicarius said, "you stand on Macragge again. And that complicates things." They walked together through halls that echoed with past glories. Banners bearing the deeds of heroes Titus had once commanded. Names carved into stone, some familiar, some newly fallen. No one saluted, not yet. The chapter had not decided what he was. The audience with the chapter master was brief and carefully observed. Roboute Guilliman's throne room felt larger than memory, not because it had changed, but because Titus had. The Primarch regarded him with a gaze that seemed to peel back centuries in a heartbeat. This was not suspicion. It was assessment. "You were accused," Guilliman said, his voice calm, impossibly measured. "You endured scrutiny beyond what most Astartes would survive. And you returned." "I did my duty," Titus said. It was all he had ever known how to say. Guilliman studied him for a long moment. Duty is a word often used to hide truth from others and from oneself. The Primarch did not ask about the warp. He did not ask about the Inquisition. Instead, he asked a single question that struck deeper than any interrogation. "When faced with damnation, what did you cling to?" Titus hesitated. Not because he lacked an answer, but because he had never spoken it aloud. "I did not cling," he said finally. "I advanced." Something like approval flickered in Guilliman's eyes. Or perhaps recognition. The verdict was not announced to the chapter. There was no ceremony. Titus was reinstated quietly, assigned not to command, but to observation. A warrior without a role. A captain without a company. He trained. He fought in minor engagements. He obeyed every order. And always he felt the sense of being watched. It was during a routine compliance action on the edge of Ultramar that the truth began to surface. The world was unremarkable industrial sprawl, minor heretical infestation, easily contained. The enemy broke quickly under Astartes' assault. But as Titus led the final push into the manufactorum depths, the air shifted. The familiar pressure of the warp crept in, subtle but unmistakable. A sorcerer had been hiding among the rebels, desperate and cornered. Warp lightning lashed out, crackling toward Titus with a scream of hatred. It should have burned him alive. Instead, it dispersed, not deflected, not resisted. It simply unraveled, as if the energy itself had forgotten how to exist. The sorcerer stared, eyes wide with something close to terror. "You are wrong," he whispered, blood pooling at his feet. "You are not supposed to be here." Titus ended him with a single shot. The moment did not go unnoticed. Reports reached Guilliman within the hour. cross-referenced with sealed inquisitorial data. With Deathwatch records previously redacted, a pattern emerged, one that could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. Titus was not immune to the warp. He was incompatible with it. The realization sent ripples through the highest levels of Imperial command. If chaos could not touch him in the ways it touched others, then what precisely was he? A flaw in the warp's design? A relic of an older truth? Or something the Emperor himself had shaped for a purpose not yet revealed? Guilliman summoned him again, this time in private. "There are forces moving," the Primarch said, standing before a hololithic display of war zones burning across the galaxy. "They have always moved. But now they hesitate where you tread." Titus said nothing. "You are becoming a symbol," Guilliman continued. "To some hope, to others a threat. And to you?" Titus asked. Guilliman turned, meeting his gaze. "To me, you are a question the galaxy is about to ask very loudly." The next mission was no longer minor. A world long thought lost to chaos had gone silent. Astropathic screams cut off mid-syllable. Imperial augurs detected structures forming where none should exist, vast, impossible geometries pressing against reality. A foothold. Guilliman gave the order himself. Titus would lead the strike force. As the fleet translated into the warp, alarms wailed, not in warning, but in confusion. The immaterium churned violently around the vessels, yet the Geller fields held with unnatural stability. Demonic manifestations recoiled, unable to close the distance. On the command deck, officers whispered prayers they did not understand. At the heart of it all, Titus stood at the viewing port, watching the warp writhe and falter like a wounded beast. For the first time since his trial, understanding dawned not as certainty, but as inevitability. Whatever he was, whatever had been done to him or through him, it was no longer just his fate at stake. The galaxy had noticed. And it was coming to test him. The warp did not welcome them. It recoiled. As the fleet breached the threshold of the corrupted system, the immaterium twisted into shapes that defied navigation logic, currents folding back on themselves like wounded serpents. Navigators screamed as their third eyes beheld something profoundly wrong, not a storm, not a god's attention, but an absence. A dead zone where the warp's voice fell silent whenever Titus's vessel drew near. The Geller field hummed at maximum output, yet strain readings dropped instead of spiking. Demonic silhouettes that normally clawed at the barrier dispersed, unraveling into nothingness. Not banished, unmade. Titus felt it more keenly than ever. Not pain, not pressure. A sensation like standing at the center of a vacuum, where something vast should have been, but was not. He closed his eyes and advanced inward, as he always had. The target world loomed ahead, its name long stricken from Imperial charts. Once a shrine planet, now a blasphemy carved into rock and atmosphere. From orbit, its surface was a lattice of obsidian spires and bleeding sigils, continents reshaped into symbols meant to be read by things that did not use eyes. The air burned with unreality. Drop pods screamed through the sky. The moment Titus's boots struck ground, the whispers began and then faltered. Warp voices rose in anticipation, tasting the souls of the intruders, then collapsed into static. The air grew heavy with confusion. Lesser demons manifested only to stutter and fade, their forms collapsing like half-remembered dreams. The strike force advanced through corridors that pulsed like living organs, walls breathed, floors flexed beneath ceramite weight, and everywhere, symbols meant to erode sanity slid away from Titus's vision, refusing to anchor themselves in his mind. At the heart of the structure waited resistance that did not retreat. A Chaos Lord emerged, armor fused to flesh, eyes burning with the certainty of damnation. Warp energy coiled around him like a crown. He laughed as he charged, blade singing with promises of eternity. The laughter stopped mid-breath. As he closed the distance, the warp around him sputtered. His aura dimmed, power bled away as if siphoned into nothing. His strike slowed, not by force, but by disbelief. "What are you?" The thing snarled, voice cracking. Titus met the blow head-on. Steel met corrupted steel. The Chaos Lord screamed not in pain, but in terror as his blessings failed him. When Titus drove his blade through the traitor's chest, the death was brutally mundane. No explosion of warp energy, no ascension. Just a body falling to the floor, suddenly very mortal. Silence followed. Across the battlefield, heretic forces broke. Not rooted, shattered. Their gods did not answer. Their powers failed. Faith curdled into panic. The Imperium had not brought extermination. It had brought negation. When the final chamber was secured, the air grew colder. The spires around them trembled, structures unraveling as if their foundations had been removed from reality itself. This place could not exist without the warp sustaining it. And Titus was killing it simply by being there. Guilliman's voice crackled through the vox, measured but strained. "Status. Objective collapsing," came the reply. "Enemy resistance minimal." There was a pause. "Captain Titus," Guilliman said, "proceed deeper. There is something you must see." The chamber beyond was older than the heresy that birthed it. Not a temple, not a fortress, a wound. Reality stretched thin around a structure that looked less built than grown, an engine of impossible angles and frozen light, suspended above a pit that bled darkness. A warp anchor. As Titus approached, the engine reacted. Not with hostility but recognition. Sigils flared, then died. Energy conduits snapped like severed veins. The structure began to collapse inward, screaming soundlessly as the immaterium lost its grip. And then Titus saw it. At the center of the engine was a figure encased in stasis light. A space marine. Armor ancient beyond classification, bearing no heraldry of any known chapter. His face was calm, eyes closed, as if sleeping through millennia. Data streamed across Titus's helm, auto-translation failing to categorize what it was seeing. Genetic markers flickered similar to his own, yet divergent in ways that defied Mechanicus logic. Guilliman's voice returned, quieter now. "That," he said, "is why this world endured. And why you were sent." Titus felt something shift inside him. Not fear, not awe. A sense of convergence. The Primarch continued. During the Great Crusade, there were experiments. Warriors engineered for wars we no longer remember. Some were lost. Others sealed away when their purpose became inconvenient. The stasis field faltered as Titus drew closer. The engine screamed louder, tearing itself apart. "You are not unique," Guilliman said. "You are surviving proof." The realization struck like a thunderbolt. His resistance to the warp, the Inquisition's unease, the way chaos recoiled. He was not blessed. He was designed. The figure's eyes snapped open. For a heartbeat, time froze. The engine detonated inward, collapsing into a singularity of silence. Light vanished. Sound ceased. Titus felt himself falling, not through space, but through meaning. When sensation returned, he was on his knees amid ruins that were no longer corrupted. The spires had crumbled into inert stone. The warp wound was gone. And the stasis chamber was empty. Guilliman's voice came through at last, edged with something dangerously close to concern. "Titus," he said, "do you see him?" Titus rose slowly, scanning the chamber. There were footprints in the dust, fresh, heavy, unmistakably Astartes. "He's awake," Titus said. Somewhere beyond the ruins, something ancient had taken its first step back into the galaxy. And for the first time, Titus wondered whether he had been sent here to stop chaos, or to awaken what came after it. The ruins were still settling when the first tremor ran through the ground, not an explosion, not structural collapse. A pulse, deep and resonant, like the aftershock of a bell struck somewhere beneath reality. Dust lifted from the stone floor and hung in the air, unmoving, as if gravity itself hesitated to decide which way it should fall. Titus stood alone in the chamber, the echo of Guilliman's last words still vibrating in his helm. Footprints led away from the shattered stasis cradle, disappearing into a corridor that should not have existed. The walls there were smooth, uncorrupted, untouched by the warp rot that had infested the rest of the structure. It was as if the world itself had reshaped to allow passage. He felt it again, that pull forward, the same instinct that had carried him through interrogation chambers, kill zones, and warp storms. Advance, always advance. Behind him, the Vox erupted into overlapping signals, reports of system-wide phenomena. Warp turbulence collapsing into dead calm. Astropaths losing contact not to interference, but to silence. Something was changing the rules, and it was happening fast. Gilliman's voice cut through the chaos. All forces, maintain perimeter, no pursuit. Captain Titus, confirm status. He's loose, Titus said. And he's moving. A pause. Not hesitation, calculation. Then you will follow, Gilliman replied. But not as a hunter. As a witness, Titus did not ask what that meant. He moved into the corridor, each step carrying him farther from the battlefield, and deeper into something that felt uncomfortably like destiny. The air grew colder the farther he went, the stone beneath his boots etched with symbols that predated Imperial record. Not Chaos runes, not Xeno's script. Something older. Something human. Memories stirred at the edge of his thoughts that were not his own. Ghost impressions of training halls beneath Terran mountains, of voices speaking his name before he had one. He pushed them aside, focusing on the present, on the steady rhythm of his breath and the weight of his armor. The corridor opened into a vast cavern lit by a pale, sourceless glow. At its center stood the other warrior. He was taller than Titus, broader in the shoulders, his armor a patchwork of archaic plate and unfamiliar design, marked by scars that had never been repaired. His helm was gone, revealing a face carved with lines of age that no space marine should bear. His eyes were not glowing, not burning with psychic fire. They were simply aware. The warrior turned slowly, as if he had known Titus was there long before the moment arrived. "So," he said, his voice rough with disuse yet perfectly clear. "They still make us." Titus did not raise his weapon. "Who are you?" The warrior studied him with unsettling intensity. "Once," he said, "we were called the Unspoken, before the legions. Before the lies became necessary." The words landed like a physical blow. Titus felt the weight of them settle into place, aligning fragments of doubt and suspicion that had followed him since his trial. "You were built to fight the warp," Titus said, not as a question. The other warrior gave a humorless smile. "No, we were built to end it." Silence stretched between them, heavy and fragile. In the distance, the cavern walls groaned as the structure continued to decay, reality reasserting itself now that the warp's anchor was gone. "They couldn't control us," the Unspoken continued. "We were too absolute. Where we walked, the immaterium thinned. Demons died not in fire, but in meaning. Gods could not look at us without pain, so they buried us, sealed us away, told the galaxy we never existed." "And me?" Titus asked. "You are a refinement," the warrior said, "a compromise. Enough resistance to survive. Not enough to terrify your masters." The words cut deeper than any accusation the Inquisition had ever leveled. Titus thought of the interrogations, the watching eyes, Gilliman's careful restraint. He had not been spared by chance. "You were sent here to awaken me," the Unspoken said softly. "Or to confirm I was still a threat." The ground shook again, harder this time. Vox traffic spiked, panic bleeding through disciplined channels. Something was responding to the world's sudden emptiness, something vast enough to notice when a warp wound was cauterized. Titus felt it then. Not fear, but pressure, like the galaxy drawing in breath. "Whatever is coming," Titus said, "it won't distinguish between us." The Unspoken laughed, low and genuine. "No, it won't." He stepped closer, and Titus felt the effect immediately. The air grew sharper, cleaner. The faint psychic haze that clung to all things in this age peeled away, leaving the world painfully real. It was intoxicating and terrifying. "You feel it," the Unspoken said. That is what you were denied. The truth of what reality is without the warp whispering in your skull. Images flooded Titus's mind unbidden. A galaxy without demonic possession, without psychic storms, without gods feeding on thought and emotion, and beneath it all, a darker implication. A galaxy where psychers could not exist, where navigators were blind, where the Imperium, as it stood, would collapse. You would destroy everything, Titus said. I would destroy what enslaves you, the Unspoken replied. The rest would burn or adapt. That is the price of freedom. Guilliman's voice returned, urgent now. Titus, disengage. Orbital signatures detected. Something is translating into real space, something enormous. The Unspoken turned his gaze upward, as if he could see through stone and sky alike. His expression shifted not to fear, but to anticipation. They've noticed, he said. It's begun. Outside the cavern, the world screamed. The sky fractured, reality tearing open as a presence pushed through that dwarfed the corruption that had come before. A god's attention, focused and furious. Titus stood between two impossible futures, one shaped by gods that devoured souls, the other by weapons that erased them. The Unspoken extended a hand, not in threat, but in invitation. Choose, he said. Stand with what you were made to be. Above them, the sky split wider, light bleeding through the wound as something vast reached for the world. Titus tightened his grip on his weapon, heart hammering not with fear, but with the weight of consequence. And for the first time since his trial, he did not know which way advancing truly lay. The sky did not tear open all at once. It peeled. Layers of reality sloughed away like burned parchment, revealing a depthless wound of color and motion beyond. Lightning without light arced across the heavens. The air screamed as pressure inverted, gravity stuttering as if unsure which universe it belonged to. Far above, something vast pressed against the veil, its presence so immense that even the Unspoken's aura of negation faltered at the edges. A god had noticed the absence. Titus felt it then, not the warp's touch but its fury. The Immaterium did not hate him. It rejected him, the way a body rejects a foreign organ. This was different. This was outrage at a flaw that should not exist. The Unspoken's hand remained outstretched. Now, he said, before they anchor themselves again, before this world becomes another shrine to their hunger. Titus did not move. Below the splitting sky, the ground convulsed. Spires collapsed into dust. Rivers of corrupted energy evaporated mid-flow. Imperial vox channels dissolved into static as astropathic choirs across the sector went suddenly, catastrophically silent. Ships in orbit drifted as their navigators clawed at empty visions, blind and screaming. Guilliman's voice broke through at last, stripped of command, raw with urgency. Titus, listen to me. What you are witnessing is not salvation. It is extinction. Titus looked at the Unspoken again. At the scars that marked battles no record remembered. At the eyes that had watched entire ages die without blinking. You knew this would happen, Titus said. Yes, the Unspoken replied. That is why I endured. A thunderclap rolled across the world as the god's presence forced itself closer. Shapes began to form in the wound above, vast silhouettes layered over one another, impossibly complex, each angle screaming blasphemy. Demons poured from the edges like blood from a reopened scar, only to unravel mid-descent as the Unspoken's influence erased them. They howled not in pain, in confusion. The god pushed harder. Titus felt the strain within himself, a resonance building in his chest and his bones. He realized then what the Inquisition had truly feared. Not corruption, not betrayal, synergy. Alone, he bent the warp. Together, he and the Unspoken threatened to break it. You are not wrong, Titus said quietly. But neither are they. The Unspoken frowned for the first time. You hesitate. I see the whole battlefield, Titus replied. And I see civilians burning in the aftermath of your victory. I see the Imperium collapsing not into freedom, but into darkness of another kind. You see the lie you were taught, the unspoken snapped. A galaxy shackled by necessity. Titus stepped forward. The air sharpened, reality clarifying painfully around them. The god above recoiled an inch, its attention narrowing, focusing. I was made to advance, Titus said. Not to erase the road behind me. The unspoken's hand slowly lowered. The god struck. Not with lightning or flame, but with presence. A psychic hammer blow that crushed thought and certainty alike. Mountains flattened. The cavern ceiling imploded. Titans would have fallen to their knees. Titus did not. Nor did the unspoken. They stood at the epicenter as the attack washed over them, annihilating demonic forms by the thousands, stripping faith from cultists light years away. The god reeled, injured not by force, but by contradiction. This is why they feared us, the unspoken shouted over the roar of collapsing reality. We are poison to them. Yes, Titus said. And poison kills indiscriminately. He turned his weapon not on the god, but on the engine remains behind them. On the last fragment of ancient technology that bound the unspoken fully into real space. Gilliman understood instantly. Titus, no. The unspoken's eyes widened. You would seal me again. I would choose restraint, Titus said, voice steady even as the world shook itself apart. Because if we become what they fear most, we prove them right. The god screamed as Titus fired. The shot was not destructive. It was precise. A disruption tuned to Titus's own impossible resonance. The engine fragment shattered, releasing a pulse that rippled outward, not erasing the unspoken, but disconnecting him, loosening his grip on reality. The unspoken staggered, dropping to one knee. No, he growled. You don't understand. I do, Titus said, stepping closer. I understand that victory without mercy is just another kind of annihilation, above them. The god recoiled, its hold slipping as the synergy broke. The wound in the sky began to close, reality knitting itself back together with agonizing slowness. The unspoken looked up at Titus, anger warring with something else. Respect, regret. They will never stop hunting you, he said. Neither side. I know, Titus replied. The unspoken laughed softly. Then you truly are one of us. With that, his form began to fade, not destroyed, but displaced, slipping back into the oubliette, between moments where he had endured for millennia. His final words echoed as the cavern collapsed around them. When the gods return in strength, you will wish I had finished this. Then he was gone. The sky sealed shut with a sound like a sutured wound. The pressure vanished. Gravity returned. Silence fell profound, aching silence. Titus dropped to one knee at last, armor cracked, breath heavy. Around him, the world lay ruined but real, no longer screaming, no longer bleeding unreality. Gilliman's voice returned, steadier now. Titus, report. Titus looked at his hands, at the faint shimmer of absence that clung to them still. The threat is contained, he said. But not ended. There was a long pause. You chose the Imperium, Gilliman said. I chose humanity, Titus replied. The fleet withdrew in silence. No victory hymns were sung. No proclamations made. Records of the engagement were sealed deeper than any before them. As Titus was escorted from the shattered world, he felt the galaxy watching him anew, not with fear alone, but with expectation. He had proven something that could not be unlearned, that gods could bleed, and that the weapons built to kill them could choose not to. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of aftermath. The fleet moved away from the wounded system without ceremony, engines burning low, as if even the machines understood that noise would be disrespectful. Behind them, the world they left behind drifted in quiet ruin, not purified, not damned, simply real. For the first time in centuries, no warp storms clawed at its orbit. No whispers followed departing ships. It was just a planet again, scarred, broken, alive. Titus stood alone in the observation chamber, watching the stars stretch into lines as the ship slipped back into the long dark between wars. His armor had been repaired, repainted, restored to ultramarine blue, but it felt different now. Lighter in some places, heavier in others, the galaxy had exhaled. So had he. Guilliman did not summon him immediately. That in itself was telling. Instead, days passed marked only by routine drills and quiet glances from battle brothers who sensed that something fundamental had shifted, even if they did not know what. News of the engagement spread only in fragments: anomalous warp behavior, unexplained enemy collapse, a threat neutralized without escalation. The truth was sealed away, locked behind layers of authority and fear. But truths do not vanish just because they are hidden. They wait. When the summons finally came, it was not to a throne room or stratageum, but to a balcony overlooking the void. Guilliman stood with his hands clasped behind his back, gazing at the stars not as symbols of dominion, but as distances yet to be crossed. "You ended a war that never officially existed," the Primarch said quietly, "and prevented one that would have consumed everything." "I delayed it," Titus replied. "Nothing more." Guilliman turned, studying him with an expression that held neither judgment nor praise. "Delay is the most precious currency humanity possesses." For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the ship filled the space between them, steady and reassuring. "There will be consequences," Guilliman continued. "The Inquisition will not forget. The warp will adapt. And the thing you denied the galaxy, it will endure." "I know," Titus said. "And yet," Guilliman said, "you would choose the same again." It was not a question. "Yes," Titus answered. The Primarch nodded once. "Then you have answered the question that haunted your trial." Titus felt the weight of that moment settle, not as relief, but as acceptance. The mystery of his fate had never been about corruption or innocence. It had been about choice, about whether a weapon could decide when not to strike. Guilliman stepped closer. "You will not be celebrated for this," he said. "Your name will not be etched beside heroes who broke worlds in the Emperor's name." "That is not why I fight," Titus replied. "I know," Guilliman said softly. "That is why you remain dangerous." They stood together, watching the distant star flare and fade. Somewhere out there, the warp still churned. Gods still whispered. The galaxy remained cruel, vast and unfinished. "You will return to command," Guilliman said at last. "But not as you were. You will walk a narrow path, watched, tested, sometimes alone." Titus inclined his head. "I have always been alone." Guilliman allowed himself a faint smile. "Not anymore." In the weeks that followed, Titus resumed his duties among the ultramarines, but the world no longer felt the same. Battlefields seemed sharper, more grounded, as if reality itself leaned closer when he arrived. Psychers felt uneasy around him, not in fear, but in awareness. The warp no longer whispered at the edge of his perception. It listened and learned. Sometimes, in moments of quiet between wars, Titus thought of the unspoken, of the ancient certainty in his eyes, of the path not taken. A future where gods were erased, and humanity stood alone beneath a silent sky, strong, free, and utterly unrecognizable. He wondered how close the galaxy had come to that ending. He wondered whether restraint was wisdom, or simply another form of fear. On one distant world, as dawn broke over a city saved by unremarkable means, a child looked up at the sky and felt no dread, no pressure, no unseen presence watching back. Just clouds, just light, just the simple fact of existing without being noticed by something hungry. That, Titus realized, might be victory enough. The Imperium would march on, battered and stubborn, praying to an emperor who no longer answered. Chaos would scheme and return in new shapes, wearing new masks. The cycle would continue, because that was the nature of this age. But now, somewhere within that endless war, there existed a flaw. A pause. A space marine who reminded gods that they were not inevitable. As the ship carried him onward to the next conflict, Titus rested his hand on the cold glass of the viewport, watching the stars drift by like embers in a dying fire. He did not know how his story would end. Exile, oblivion, or something stranger still. He only knew this. Advancing was no longer about conquest. It was about choosing what should survive. And perhaps that was the most dangerous idea of all. If this story left you thinking, questioning, or imagining what comes next, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Share it with others who walk these grimdark paths. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to like the video.